Today's story is about Buster, my dog, and he was quite a dog I had a long time ago when I lived in Florida. And I'll tell you how I got him and stuff. I was staying with my grandparents over at their house, and me and my grandfather were working at this business we had together. I was of age. I think I was like 19 or something. I can't remember exactly how old I was. Maybe 20 or something. Not very old. But we were working. We had this business. We'd go down to Orlando, and we'd put stripes on cars for the car dealerships and body side moldings. We had an import company that we would buy the moldings off of. And back then, they were aluminum anodized body side moldings, and they had an insert that went in that was made out of vinyl. And then we also had these stripes that we put on the cars, And I used to do the work. I'd put the stripes on the cars, the pinstriping and stuff for the dealerships. My grandfather, he would go in and talk to the sales managers and stuff and get the jobs for me. So we were kind of working together at this little business, and I think it was called, I forget what it was called, the name of the business, but it was a trim and body molding business that we were working at. And I decided I wanted a dog. I can't remember why I wanted a dog, but I wanted a guard dog. I pictured him in my mind. He was going to be this big, powerful dog that was going to weigh like 90 pounds or something, have big, long fangs, and he would just be absolutely the biggest beast and the most horrible, vicious guard dog there ever was. But somehow he was going to be friendly to me in my mind. I thought in my mind, but he was going to be like guard the property and guard everything. This perfect guard dog. This is the way young people think. They think, hey, you know what? This is what I want, and this is what I'm going to get. I'm going to go get this guard dog. So that was what was going through my mind at the time. So I started looking in the papers, and purebred dogs were expensive. So I thought about a German Shepherd. So I looked in the different breeders around, and back in those days, they wanted like $300 or $400 for a purebred German Shepherd. And then I thought, well, maybe a Rottweiler. So I looked through, and Rottweilers were expensive too for a pup, purebred pup. And I thought, maybe Doberman Pinschers. And I thought, well, no, I don't really like Doberman Pinschers that much. Plus, you got to get their ears done, and everything. And they got to take them to a vet and get their ears done and everything. And I didn't really quite like the shape of a Doberman Pinscher. I was thinking more in terms like a big pit bulldog or something like that, I wanted him to be brown. I thought to myself, well, he'd look better if he was like a brindle brown color, So I looked all around for a week or two, couldn't find anything I wanted in a dog, so I started looking through the papers. Seen this ad in the Eustis newspaper. It said, free pups. So I talked to my grandmother, and she said, yeah, let's go look at these puppies, My grandmother was all gung-ho. She was with me. She wanted to get a dog too, so we went looking at these ads in the newspaper and all these puppies for sale and stuff. So we decided to drive in to Eustis and take a look at these pups that were free. So we drove in, and this lady invited us into her home at the place where they had the free pups, And we went in, and she had this big box. And all these puppies were around the bottom of the box. And they were running around. There was white ones, black ones. And there was this one in there. He was brown, the color I wanted, just exactly the color I wanted, a brown puppy, and he had this big head on him, a big jaw. I looked at his jaw, and a big jaw on him, and a nice, healthy-looking puppy. And I pictured in my mind him growing up to be this big, powerful pit bulldog that would weigh about 90 pounds. I said, oh, yeah, free. They can't beat free. So I said, I want this puppy here. And she said, fine, you can take the puppy, she said. Free puppy. I can't remember now. I think we talked to her, and she knew that the puppy was going to a good home, with us, me and my grandmother. My grandmother, she spotted this little white one with a black patch on his eye and kind of a little bit longer fur than the one I got. the puppy, and we went home with these puppies. So the two puppies were, they were about 8 weeks old, I guess, and it was fun having a puppy, bringing up this puppy. But I kept picturing in my mind how it was going to grow into this big, massive guard dog, with the big, long teeth and everything. And as my puppy grew, after he got about 2 or 3 months old, he wasn't as big as I thought he was going to be. And his body shape, he started to get this body shape that was a little, but I loved him. I wasn't going to give him up just because he wasn't quite what developed it into what I expected, I named him Buster. Because, Buster's a great name for a big, brawny, bulldog guard dog, Buster. Buster would be a great name. So I named him Buster. As he grew, time progressed. He didn't turn out to be what I expected. He started to take on the shape like of a greyhound. And he wasn't very big at all, And he looked more like a small greyhound, mixed breed, small greyhound. He only got up to about maybe 25 or 30 pounds. And when he got full grown, But he was the most unusual dog. I'm going to tell you, the smartest dog I ever had. He would do things. He loved to go for a walk and talk about run fast. Now, when he got about 6 months old, he loved to run, and he had this shape like a greyhound. I think his father must have been a greyhound, a brown-colored greyhound. Maybe his mother was some sort of a terrier, but he was a mixed breed. But he wasn't what I expected at all. But I liked him because he had this personality. It was all about personality with him. He had a very outgoing personality for a dog, and very intelligent. Now, one of the chairs inside the house, I explained to you what his personality was like. He had his chair he liked to get up into and have sleep. This old lazy boy rocking chair. He'd get up in there and he'd curl up and lay down to go to sleep. And my dad would come along. When my dad come along and try to move him out of the chair, he would growl at my dad. And another thing about him, too, that I noticed was he grew up with cats. Now, there's this lady across the street. Her name was Mrs. Jenkins. And she had about a half a dozen cats. Those cats roam free in her yard. Buster, I always let him roam free in our yards, Buster would go over there and visit them. Even when he was just a little pup, he'd go over there and visit those cats. And he started to do the same thing the cats would do. He was like, there wasn't any other dogs around. There's just these cats Mrs. Jenkins had. And he kind of lived with these cats. He'd stay over there. He'd eat their cat food out of their cat dish, And then he'd come over and he'd have dinner at our house, too. He'd eat out of his own dog dish. Of course, dog food. He seemed to like cat food. But he also had made friends with these cats. And I caught him many times sitting over there and curled up in the cat bed with where the cats were sleeping right next to him. And they were all just buddy-buddy, So one of the things I noticed about him was that he started to dig a hole every time he'd go to use the toilet, not just the wee-wee, but the other one, the feces one. He'd dig this little hole with his paw, like a cat would. And then he wouldn't let anybody watch him use the bathroom. So if I was taking him on a walk, other dogs, will just squat and use the bathroom right in front of people, But this dog was really weird because he would go into the woods or into the bushes and he'd look back to see if I was looking at him, and he would try to find a spot where I couldn't see him to use the bathroom, and then he'd dig this little hole. and he would poo in the hole, and then he would scrape the dirt over top of it, you know? And I said to myself, he's acting like the cats. It must be a behavior that he had adopted off of the cats because he was such good friends with all these cats. So I really enjoyed having Buster. I mean, he would roam around the neighborhood and he would bring things home. This is one of the things he always used to do. He would bring home a shoe, or there would be a sock in the backyard that he might bring home, or he might bring home a ball from somebody else's yard, or he was roaming around the neighborhood finding things and he would bring them home, you know. So I had Buster a couple of years, and so we decided we were going to take vacation. Pretty soon that fall, we decided we were going to take a vacation, but it was getting late in the summer, and this other stray dog came along. He was just out of nowhere. I don't know how it happened, but we had a patio where we used to feed Buster and put his food dish and his water dish and stuff. And this other dog came along, made friends with my dog Buster, and it was a big Siberian Husky, black and white, and he had one brown eye and one blue eye. This Siberian Husky, he was a beautiful dog, but he was a stray dog, and he made friends with my dog, and he was eating from the same dish and stuff, and hanging around the house for 2-3 weeks or something, you know. And for some reason or another, we decided to adopt him and take him in. We started feeding him, and we named him. We named him Klondike, Klon for short. So he started hanging around with Buster. Klondike was the boss. And Klondike hated cats. So Klondike would chase these cats of Mrs. Jenkins around the yard. He'd chase them up a tree, and he'd sit at the base of the tree and kind of bark at them for a while, and then he'd come back home and have something to eat, and the cat would come back down the tree again. So it's funny, you know, because Buster started running around with Klondike, and when the two of them were running around together, Buster would chase cats just like Klondike was. So I guess it's a learned behavior because that's what he started doing. And up until that point, he'd always been friends with the cats. He'd lay down with the cats in the cat bed and everything else, you know, and buddies with the cats. But when Klondike was there, the two of them were running around chasing cats. And this is what they were doing all afternoon, you know, every day. So turns out what happened was my mother, you know, there was a couple of diseases that she was awfully frightened of. One of the things she was frightened of was tetanus, or lockjaw, the disease lockjaw. She was really scared of that. I remember one time when I was a really young kid, I must have been about 5 years old, my mother, for one reason or another, she had stepped on a nail or got a cut on herself or something, and she was very worried that she was catching tetanus. Now, I know this doesn't sound reasonable or anything, but, you know, people, they can have things that they're frightened of, you know, and so she started to get these things where she was always feeling her jaw and opening and closing her jaw and thinking maybe she had tetanus. She went into the doctor, you know, and she was frightened of tetanus and telling them, so they gave her a tetanus shot anyway, and she got over her artificial symptoms of tetanus or whatever, you know, like feeling her jaw and stuff, you know. She wasn't worried anymore, so after she got the shot or whatever, you know. But another disease she was really frightened of, my mother, was rabies. So it just turned out that this Klondike dog, Klon, the one we got, after we had him a few weeks, he started to get sick. He started to cough and everything else, you know, and he started to lose weight, and he wasn't looking so good, you know, and you could tell he was sick, really sick, ill. So we took him into the vet about 30 miles away. And the vet took a look at the dog, and he says, "Oh my gosh," he says, "I think this dog might have rabies." So he told my father and stuff. My father took the dog into the vet, and he said, "Oh my gosh, I think this dog might have rabies." So my father brought the dog home, and he put him in a dog pen so he couldn't escape. The vet told him what to do. He said, "Do this, do this, do that." Now, I don't know for what reason the vet thought the dog had rabies, but the vet must have been. Anyway, he called up the sheriff's department and everything else. The vet did, and told us to keep the dog for observation, and we had to put the dog in a cage and everything else. And my mother was so scared because she got worried. So my mother got some sort of a little cold, head cold or something. And my mother started thinking that, oh no, maybe I'm catching rabies. She was all worried. She was all upset because she thought the dog had rabies. And then the situation only got worse from there. Because the vet office called up my house, home. They told us that the county department sheriff was involved and everything, and that we had to take the dog into the. Oh, the dog died then. That's what happened next. The dog died. A day or two later, right? So then they said, okay, you got to take the dog in to the health department. So my dad, he took the corpse of the dog, into the health department. And the guy in the health department, he said, okay, he said, listen, he said, this dog might have died from rabies because the vet said that he exhibited rabies symptoms. So my dad says, yeah, okay, what do we got to do? And the health department guy says, well, you come out with me to the landfill, and we got to chop the dog's head off. Says to my dad, he says, and he gave my dad rubber gloves, and two of them evidently worked at it. And my dad did the chopping, and he gave the head to the vet, to the health department guy. And the health department guy packed it up, I guess, in a bag or whatever, and sent it off to Atlanta, the head of the dog, to the Center for Disease Control to be tested for rabies. Well, my mother was just about going berserk by this time. She was sick with some sort of a head cold or something. she was thinking, I don't know what she was thinking, but she was very worried, very concerned, because of rabies is so bad, and everything. And the health department said, well, if the dog comes back positive, he said, well, we're going to send a sheriff out for you guys, and everybody's going to have rabies shots if the dog comes back positive. So there was a couple days there while we were waiting for the test results to come back, whether it was going to test positive or negative, where we were all worried. We were all worried. But my mother was just about having a fit, Anyway, and my aunt, too, she was all worried. My mother and my aunt were looking up rabies on the internet and everything else, I actually wasn't an internet back then, but books and stuff they were going through and stuff. Anyway. So, turns out a few days goes by and the test results came back negative, and it come back positive, I guess, for distemper. The dog had distemper. It wasn't rabies. It was some sort of distemper he had when he died. So, after those test results come back negative, my mother was so relieved. And everybody in the family was relieved. The dog didn't have rabies, thank God. I mean, it's just wonderful. The dog was only distemper. But, we missed him and everything because he was a really nice dog. He's such a pretty dog. It's a really crying shame he died of distemper, But Buster was still alive and kicking and healthy. So what happened was after Clown was gone, he wasn't hanging around with Buster any longer, Buster went right back to being buddies with the cats again. The very next day after Clown was gone, I remember Buster across the road over there wandering over and laying down in the cat bed, and the cat's laying down up next to him, and him sitting over there eating their food again, buddies again, no more chasing them around, chasing them up trees or anything. That was all Clown's business, the Clown was the boss. But now the boss was gone, and when the cat's away, the mice shall play, So Buster was back to his old self again. A month or two passed, and we were going to head to Ontario for a little vacation to visit my grandmother up in Ontario. So the day come when we were going to go, and we had this pickup truck we were going to take and drive to Ontario, the three of us, me, my mother, and my father, And the pickup truck had this fold-down seat, and it was an extended cab, and it had that place in the back where you can put your tools and everything back there. And so we loaded our stuff in the back of the pickup truck, and we all headed to Ontario. And my mother was in the middle, and I was in the door, sitting on the door. And she was in the middle, sitting in the middle of the pickup truck. Big, long bench seat in these old pickup trucks. My dad was driving. And I would fold the seat back and go, "Here, Buster," Buster would come running, and he would just take one big jump and blip right up in the back of the seat there and lay right down on his side. And I'd shut the seat back there, put the seat back, and he was down in behind the seat, laying on the floor back there. I had a little carpet back there for him to lay on. And he just loved that. I guess the muffler of the truck ran underneath there, and I guess it was kind of warm. And he'd lay down on that place back there, and that was his spot. He just loved that spot down in behind the seat. It was like a little house for him back there, like there was quite a bit of room back there, and he would just lay there, and he was so quiet, you'd never know he was back there. So he kind of, when we were driving, never make a sound, So we were driving along through Georgia. Me, my mother, and my father heading on I-75, heading up north heading toward Detroit, Long trip on I-75. And I think we were south of Atlanta someplace. And my mother looked at me, and she said, "Did you just let a stinky?" And I was like, "No, I didn't. She looked over at my dad. She says, Did you just let a stinky?" And my dad says, No, I didn't lay a stinky. And she says, "Well, I didn't do it. You smell it?" And I smelled the air, and I was like, "Yeah, I can smell it. I can smell it." My dad was like, "Yeah, I can smell it," So we drove along a bit further, and the stink smell went away. And then there was another one. And my mother looked at me. She says, "You're letting stinkies, aren't you?" I said, No, I haven't got any gas. And she said, "My dad, you let stinky?" And my dad was like, "No, I'm not gassy either." And she says, "Well, I'm not doing it." And I kind of put my head back toward the rear of the seat, like behind the seat, like those old bench seats in those trucks, put my head back there. And it was stronger back there, down behind the seat, Buster's down in there farting. He's farting all along, So we kept driving along, camping, at campgrounds on the way up. And I think we stopped 2 or 3 nights, and we got up around, I think it was Ohio or someplace, and we stopped at a big city. I can't remember what we stopped for. And we were right in the center of the downtown area, one of these big cities. There's sky-rise buildings around everything else, and we stopped the pickup truck. Everybody got out of the pickup truck, and I think we were going to go to a pizza place, to tell you the truth. Up around... It was in Ohio, the Buckeye State. We stopped at a pizza place or something, the downtown core. I don't know what we were doing in downtown. I can't remember. But Buster got out of the truck, and he wasn't on his chain or anything. I used to keep a long chain for him. He wasn't on his chain or anything. He went for a run, and he started running. He ran right down the road and ran right out of sight, ran behind the buildings and stuff, and ran a long ways off. And this was in an industrial section, and there were sky-rise buildings, but it was an industrial part of town, like an industrial park. And so I was sitting there talking to my dad and stuff for a few minutes, and Buster was gone. And after a while, I said, well, I don't want him to wander off too far. Now, Buster would always come when I called him. I yell real loud, "Hey, Buster!" And I whistle like with my fingers in my mouth, those high-pitched whistles. So that's what I did. I whistled for him and stuff. And I'm going to tell you what, that dog, if he heard that whistle and me yell for him, immediately he would always come and head toward the direction of the whistle and yell. So I knew he was coming if he was within, and he could hear a long ways off, and so I kept whistling, and kept yelling for him, Buster, in that part of town, foreign city. And I got worried. I said to myself, gee, if I lose him here, if he's gone wandering off someplace, I might never find him. Now, he could run. I'm going to tell you, I clocked him with my car. That dog could run 35 miles an hour or close to it because he was half greyhound. So he'd been running. He come running immediately, but it took him a whole 3 or 4 or 5 minutes to get back from wherever he had wandered off to in that city, in that industrial section, because he was just panting by the time he got back. But I kept whistling. He kept honing in on that whistle. He could hear it, and I could just imagine him probably stopping each time, listening which direction the whistle's coming from, and then bolting in that direction as fast as he could run. Because when he got back, he was just like completely out of breath. He was just like panting. His tongue was hanging out, and he was hot and everything. I said, I was glad to see him. Here he come, trotting in. How far away did you go? I said to him. He must have went about a mile or two away, but he come trotting in. And I pulled the seat back. Boing! Right up in there, into his spot, and laid down there, in that shady spot behind the seat. And we were all ready to go, so we left. Buster was back there. So we kept driving, and we were almost up to Detroit. We drove through Detroit. We drove up to Windsor, and we went to the border. They stopped us at the border. This was back in the good old days, back when the Canadian border there, you didn't even need to have one of these passports or anything. All you need was a driver's license, pass through the Canadian border. You didn't need visas, passports, or any of that stuff. Between Canada and the United States, it was like back in those days was like, it was much simpler times, than it is now. Now they keep inventing new things. You keep needing more and more papers all the time. Every year, it's more and more papers. But back in those days, it was much more simple and much more routine. And it was back before 9/11, back in the days when travel was much less complicated. Let's just put it that way. And if you guys know what I'm talking about, guys know what an absolute nightmare it was during the COVID infection for travel, And back in those days, it was just so much more simple. So we stopped at the border, and we showed my dad showed his driver's license. I don't even think they bothered looking at my mother, my identification. They just asked us where we're going on vacation. Yeah, good. You carrying any alcohol, tobacco, firearms, or anything like that? No, we're not. Okay, you can go in. We forgot about the dog. He was being so quiet, down in behind the seat, never made a sound. We just got used to leaving him back there, and he never made a sound. He just slept the whole time, He enjoyed it back there, scratching his fleas or whatever, just back behind the seat. We forgot all about him. We forgot to mention him. We drove into Canada, and we forgot all about the dog. So we drove to my grandmother's place. She was waiting for us. She was happy. And up north of Toronto, we drove to my grandmother. She had a nice little house up there and everything. And Buster just loved it. He got out of the car there, and all that green grass. It was late summertime, and all that green grass everywhere, and green trees, and sunny afternoons. at my grandmother's place, and she had a big barbecue back there and everything. And Buster always got a little piece of meat, from what was ever cooking on the barbecue, hot dogs or whatever. And he just loved it there, running around in her yard and having fun, having a real good time. But I noticed every day he would bring home something from her neighborhood. He brought home this horn. It was like a cow's horn. It had been hollowed out, and on the end it had been done for a horn. It was made to blow, And he was sitting there chewing on that thing. And he chewed all the end of the horn like a bone, and he was chewing it like a bone. And I took it away from him. And I cleaned it up, washed it up, and I started to blow I blew it like a horn, So I kept that. I don't know where he got it, somewhere in that neighborhood. He started bringing home shoes and squeak toys and balls, and every day it was 2 or 3 items that he'd drag home from the neighbors there in that neighborhood. And, and he'd get an item like that, he'd always get it between his teeth, and he wouldn't let you have it at first. He was like growl over it, this is mine, I brought it home, I found it, this is mine. So, one afternoon, went for a walk with Buster, and I think my mother and father, we all went for a walk in that neighborhood, and we were walking down the street, and we went down to the main street, and Buster was walking along with us, and he always followed you good, Buster did. So it wasn't I didn't really feel a need to have a chain on him or have him on leash or anything, because looking back now, and I'm going to tell you guys, this is actually a lesson for you guys. Well, I'm going to tell you now, it's kind of sad. But it's a lesson for you dog owners out there. And I learned the lesson. No matter how good your dog is at following you, always keep them on a lead if you're going to go for a walk. Because it's kind of sad what happened next, Buster wasn't on a lead. And back in those days, I didn't know better. I know better now. If you got a dog and you like your dog, keep it on a lead. Keep it on a leash. So we were walking along. And this little white Spitz type dog, I think they call them a Spitz. They're all fluffy and furry and they're white. And he come running out of his house, this little dog. And he was just as mad as hell. And he come running after Buster, and he chased Buster. And he chased Buster out into the road. I think you guys know what happened next. It was just so happened a big car was coming down the road just at the exact same time. So, that was the end of Buster. It was bad, and it was very sad what happened, and he was an awfully good dog, while I had him. I feel awful bad, that I lost him that way. But it's a good lesson for you guys. If you got a dog, always make sure your dog's on the lead. Anyway, listen, thank you guys for listening to the story this morning. We'll catch you guys in the next episode. Have a great afternoon. Bye-bye.